are the Vikings? The Vikings, originating from Scandinavia, modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, were not just raiders and pirates. These Norsemen were also explorers, traders, and settlers who left a deep mark on the history of Europe and the Atlantic world. Known for their longships, they traversed seas and rivers far beyond their homeland, reaching as far as North America and the Middle East. But what made the Vikings so unique? In this video, we'll dive into their origins, their motivations, and how they managed to become some of the most feared yet respected people of their time. Origins and early Viking society. To understand the Viking Age, we must first explore the social and political landscape of Scandinavia before the Vikings began their raids. The land was divided into small kingdoms or chiefdoms, where power was concentrated among local chiefdoms. Life was harsh, with long, cold winters and limited agricultural land. This scarcity of resources pushed the Norse people to look beyond their shores. The early Viking society was primarily agrarian, but they were also skilled in ironwork, woodworking, and other crafts. Their economy was based on farming, animal husbandry, and fishing, but the limited agricultural output drove the need for trade and expansion. As we will see, these economic factors, combined with internal political struggles, helped fuel their outward expansion. The Viking expansion, what drove them? One of the most fascinating questions about the Vikings is what drove them to explore, raid, and settle such distant lands. Scholars have suggested various reasons, including overpopulation, political unrest, and the lure of wealth and adventure. Viking expansion was fueled not only by the search for plunder but also by trade opportunities and new lands for settlement. During this time, Europe was fragmented and weak, with many kingdoms vulnerable to external attacks. The wealth stored in monasteries and towns made these areas attractive targets for Viking raids. However, it wasn't just about raiding. The Vikings were also astute traders, exchanging goods like furs, amber, and slaves for silver, spices, and luxury items from the Islamic and Byzantine worlds. Their trading networks extended from the North Atlantic to the Caspian Sea. Raids and warfare, fear and strategy. The Vikings' reputation as fearsome warriors is well deserved. Their raids were swift, brutal, and devastating to the coastal towns and monasteries they targeted. What made the Vikings such effective raiders was their tactical advantage, their longships. These fast and maneuverable vessels could navigate both open seas and shallow rivers, allowing the Vikings to strike without warning and retreat just as quickly. Viking warfare tactics were advanced for their time. They used surprise, speed, and mobility to outmaneuver their enemies, often striking during times when defenses were down, such as religious holidays. The famous raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793 AD sent shockwaves throughout Europe, signaling the beginning of the Viking Age. Over the next 2 centuries, Viking raids would terrorize coastal Europe, from the British Isles to the Mediterranean. Settlement and exploration. More than just raiders. Despite their fearsome reputation, the Vikings were also explorers and settlers who ventured far beyond Scandinavia, in search of new opportunities. Around the year 870 AD, the Vikings discovered Iceland, and by the late 10th century, they had established settlements in Greenland under the leadership of Eric the Red. These were not just temporary raiding camps but long-term colonies. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Viking exploration is their journey to North America. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, led an expedition to a land he called Vinland, which many historians believe to be located in modern-day Newfoundland, Canada. While the settlement at Vinland was short-lived, the Vikings were the first Europeans to set foot in the New World, nearly 500 years before Columbus. Their exploration wasn't limited to the west. To the east, Vikings sailed down the rivers of Russia, establishing trade routes that connected the Baltic Sea to the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate. These Norse traders, known as the Rus, even played a crucial role in the founding of the Russian state. Viking religion, myths, gods, and the afterlife. The Viking worldview was deeply shaped by their polytheistic religion, which centered around a pantheon of gods and goddesses, including Odin, the wise and cunning Allfather, Thor, the hammer-wielding god of thunder, and Freya, the goddess of love and fertility. The Vikings believed that these deities had direct influence over their lives and fate, especially in matters of war and exploration. One of the most fascinating aspects of Viking religion was their concept of the afterlife. The Vikings believed that warriors who died bravely in battle would be taken by the Valkyries to Valhalla, Odin's great hall, where they would feast and fight until the end of the world, known as Ragnarok. This belief in a glorious afterlife may have contributed to the Vikings' fearlessness in battle. Viking myths were preserved in the form of sagas, long narratives that recounted the deeds of gods and heroes. These sagas, passed down orally for generations, were eventually written down in the 13th century, providing a rich source of information about Viking culture and beliefs. Daily life and social structure. How Vikings lived. While Viking warriors often get the spotlight, daily life in Viking society was complex and highly organized. At the core of Viking life was the farmstead, where families worked together to grow crops, raise livestock, and craft goods. Viking society was hierarchical, with kings and chieftains at the top, followed by free men, known as carls, and enslaved people, known as thralls. Women in Viking society enjoyed relatively high status compared to other European cultures of the time. They could own property, manage farms, and in some cases, even participate in expeditions. Archaeological evidence, including graves containing weapons, suggests that some Viking women may have been warriors, although this is still debated among historians. The family unit was central to Viking life, and social bonds were reinforced by communal activities, such as feasting, religious ceremonies, and storytelling. Viking society placed a strong emphasis on honor and loyalty, and individuals who violated these values could be subject to severe punishment or exile. The fall of the Viking Age, integration into Europe. By the 11th century, the Viking Age began to wane as the Norse people settled into established kingdoms and adopted Christianity. The spread of Christianity throughout Scandinavia changed the Viking way of life, as pagan rituals were replaced with Christian rites, and monasteries were no longer seen as targets for raids but as centers of power and learning. Additionally, the formation of strong centralized states in England, France, and elsewhere made Viking raids more difficult. The Viking leaders themselves began to integrate into European society. In 911 AD, the Viking leader Rollo was granted land in what is now Normandy, in exchange for his loyalty to the French king, marking the beginning of the Norman dynasty that would eventually conquer England in 1066. Viking influence today, a global legacy. Even though the Viking Age ended nearly a millennium ago, their legacy is still very much alive. From the place names in England and Normandy to the Norse mythology that inspires modern literature and entertainment, the Vikings continue to fascinate us. In Canada, archaeological discoveries, such as Lancel Meadows, provide tangible evidence of Viking presence in the New World, challenging long-held views of European exploration history. Their influence can also be seen in the genetic makeup of populations across Europe, where Viking ancestry is still present in many people today. In popular culture, the image of the Viking as a fearless adventurer and warrior has been romanticized in books, movies, and television shows, perpetuating their enduring mystique. Conclusion: the enduring spirit of the Vikings. The Vikings were more than just raiders, they were innovators, explorers, and nation builders whose influence shaped the course of history in ways that are still felt today. Their voyages, trade networks, and settlements connected distant parts of the world, from North America to the Middle East, leaving behind a legacy of adventure and resilience. This video was crafted with cutting-edge artificial intelligence to bring you an immersive and informative experience. If you enjoyed learning about the Vikings, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating history content. Let us know in the comments what aspect of Viking history you'd like to explore next. Discover the past and stay curious.